It's time for the final Big Mountain Power Rankings. Let's see who's number one.
The Power Rankings are back, so we're back on the Big Mountain, where we bring you a detailed focus on the Big Ten, the Mountain West, and whatever's left of the pack.
Hey, it's good to have you here on the mountain. I am JY. This is my good friend Steve. Steve, we're going to do our final power ranking episode here. For those of you that are new to the channel, we take all the Big Ten teams, we take all the Mountain West teams, we add in the 4 teams going to the Big Ten, so that's Oregon, that's Washington, that's USC, and that's UCLA. And then we've also joined in Oregon State and Washington State. We know they're going to be having a scheduling alliance with the Mountain West next year. We've kind of taken them on this year and done a lot with them anyway.
Just adopted them.
Yeah. So 32 teams we're going to go over. We'll kind of chunk them out into thirds and save the suspense till the very end. Who's going to be our top team at the mountain here? So let's start with the bottom, 21 through 32. Really not a lot of movement down here. We have a lot of movement in the middle group, not a ton of movement here in the bottom group. Washington State still in the bottom third, sitting here at 21st. We had 2 teams actually move down out of the middle group. The first of those is Minnesota, and then the second of those, down 7 this week, the past 2 weeks, Indiana, down to 26th, out of that middle 10 group, dropping like a rock. Everybody else kind of where they're at, up or down, maybe 1 or 2 spots, but overall not a ton of movement here in the bottom group.
Yeah, no, not really. Indiana, they kind of hung around there. I think, I was giving them some credit for some games that they played kind of decent in, maybe in losses, whatever. But, they kind of just petered out down the stretch. And then same with Minnesota. Minnesota had that kind of freaky win over Iowa, maybe in the middle towards late in the season. So we were kind of giving a little bit of credit for that, but they just, both of those teams definitely belong in this bottom group, so it doesn't really surprise me.
Yep, for sure. Well, let's just move to the middle group. Let's get to where there's a little bit more action here.
Yeah.
So our middle group, the team up the most this entire week, all the way up to 11th. Northwestern, just looking great here at the end of the season. They're up to 11th. They've moved up 11 out of the bottom third here, almost into the top 10 for crying out loud, just knocking on the door here in 11th. We also have Maryland up 6 after some decent play here in late in the season after they had that great start, kind of mediocre middle and playing decent here down the stretch. Couple teams down out of our top 10. We've got UCLA and USC. We've talked about them in these power rankings. We saw them potentially dropping out of the top 10. It took them a while to do it because everybody below them was not really doing any better. But here on the last power rankings we're doing, we've got UCLA and USC sitting right here in 14 and 15, right in the middle of the pack. Really 2 teams that just, you had, especially USC, very high expectations early on. And about the middle of the season on, they have just struggled mightily. I mean, UCLA losing to Cal here at the last week of the season, so just really odd. And then the other one that's been down a ton, Illinois, down 8 to 19th.
Yeah, I mean, Illinois just didn't close out the season strong. They started bad. They kind of had a middle where they showed maybe they had turned the corners, and then they just didn't close. They didn't close the season strong. So doesn't surprise me. UCLA and USC, both of us, we were surprised they kind of hung around the top. It was more by default. Yeah, and they finally just kind of, they were just hanging around, and they dropped to I think where they really, deserve to be after they finally kind of lost that luster, the early season luster, especially in USC's case.
Right.
So I know there was a couple times you couldn't believe that they'd stayed in the top 10.
Yeah.
And this is where they should be. This is where they need to be. Yep. And they were lucky to stay up there in the top 10 for as long as they did.
No doubt. And Northwestern, I mentioned how much they moved up in our rankings. Just looking great down the stretch there. They were the underdog for pretty much every game, and they're coming through and winning the games. I think the one was 2 weeks ago. They were like 11-point underdog, and they win the game straight up. So just great things happening there, and I know their coach is in place now, so things may be on the upswing here for Northwestern.
They finished really strong, winning record in the Big Ten, winning record overall, bowl eligible. Their coach, like you said, he gets changed to permanent head coach, gets the interim tag taken off, and They just and I believe he was nominated for National Coach of the Year.
Okay, I missed that.
Yeah, so just a lot of great things. They just, obviously I was so down on them to begin the season.
Right,
they were just starting in chaos, but obviously that coach did a fantastic job, just kept them together, and they really sprinted towards the end.
Yeah,
closed out strong. So it's great to see them up 11, almost broke into the top 10, very close to it.
Yeah, well, let's get into our top 10. We're going to chunk these down into a little bit smaller groups. We'll talk about 7, 8, 9, 10. Here we got Oregon State at 7th, Boise State, the Mountain West champ, at 8th, San Jose State at 9th, and UNLV at 10th. So Boise State, San Jose State, UNLV, the three teams that tied for the Mountain West regular season title. Obviously, they had to go through the BCS computer models to figure out who was going to play each other. San Jose State coming really strong at the end. UNLV kind of having the most overall consistently strong season. But here we got Boise, obviously, as the Mountain West champion. Well, obviously, we have them ahead of everyone else in the Mountain West. San Jose State just above UNLV because they did beat them in Week 13. Yep. And then UNLV just kind of, unfortunately, ending on a two losses here. They lose to San Jose State last week of the regular season, and then in the Mountain West Championship game, really they got it taken to them pretty good by the Boise State team.
Yeah, Boise just closed the season so strong.
Yeah.
They just killing people there second half of the season. Did great. They end up where they deserve to be, Mountain West champions. They're the best team in the Mountain West overall, top to bottom. And yeah, UNLV ends up basically having to finish great season all season. I'm glad to see they hung in there in the top 10. I think they deserve to finish in the top 10, but they have to finish the season playing the other top two teams,
right.
Basically the last game of the regular season in the championship game. So no shame for them.
Yeah.
They dropped a few spots, but they hung in there in the top 10. And I'm happy to see Oregon State hang around there. They've had just a really good season all around. The end of the season, they played Oregon and played a good, tough game, solid game against one of the better teams in the country. A team that really had a chance going in the championship weekend to be in a playoff contender, and Oregon State hung around. So great, very happy for the Beavers. Very great, just a great season for them.
Yep.
So really happy to see them hang around there in 7th.
Yeah, they've been hanging around right here in 6-7 land for quite a while with us. So I do want to just mention Boise State and San Jose State. The first time they're in our top 10 all season, we had, I think, 6 different Mountain West schools have their time up here in the top 10. We had Fresno for a while. We had Air Force. We had Wyoming, I think, break into the top 10 at one point. But really, as you look at it for the Mountain West, these are the 3 top schools for this season. Not just from where they ended up in the standings, but consistently the best 3 schools in the Mountain West. And I agree with you with Oregon State, right where they should be there in 7th.
And it's interesting, we do these completely independent of each other.
Yeah.
And you and I had them exactly in the same order there, which the order is kind of obvious, but the exact same number, 8, 9, and 10. So pretty much consensus on there, even though we were completely separate. I'm obviously the Big Ten guy. You're the Mountain West guy, but it pretty clear. They all 3 of them really good seasons. Happy for them, and they deserve those rankings
for sure. And you mentioned us being consistent. We're consistent with our top 10 from 1 through 10. You and I, we do these completely separate, and then we combine them. We had the exact same 1 through 10. Definitely a lot of kind of changes in the middle 10.
Yeah.
But our top 10 were exactly the same. So let's get to the next group. 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got Ohio State, who was our number 1 team 2 weeks ago. We both thought they would beat Michigan. Obviously, that didn't happen, so they slide down to the number 3 slot. We have Oregon, who lost to Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. They're sitting at 4. Penn State staying strong at 5, and Iowa coming all the way up into 6th. Just a fantastic season for them, and they just got outplayed by a better Michigan team. We did a reaction video on that. It's just the talent level is just different. Iowa hung around really well in the first half. You mentioned defense. How great the defense was playing there. And when you have a defense and special teams that can do that, you can hang around in games. So, I think it's good to have Iowa up here. They're a very, very strong team. And, of course, Penn State was right here in this 5, 6, 7. They've been in that same spot pretty much all season for us.
Yeah.
So,
no shame for anybody in this group. First of all, Iowa, everyone's been mocking them, including us.
Right.
But, they have a 10-2 season, get to the Big Ten West, they win the Big Ten West, get to the Big Ten title game, I thought played a heck of a game against Michigan.
Yeah.
And if you go back to think, okay, we say, hey, their offense, their scoring is really low. Their offense just isn't very good. If you think of the players, the key players, Cade McNamara, their starting quarterback, who was a huge transfer addition, just a good solid quarterback. He goes out, the first few weeks of the season. Their tight end, All-American candidate tight end goes out. And then you have Cooper DeJean. Yeah, he's a defensive player, but he was also a punt returner.
Yep.
One of their best threats to score. So you think, they gave Michigan all they could handle, really. And Michigan's talent, just like you said, just wore them out in the second half.
Right.
But imagine if Iowa had those three players, really could have been a close game, even closer. And really you could have seen them then probably beating Minnesota.
Sure.
If they had those players going 11-1 in the regular season instead of just 10-2, which, so no shame for them. Penn State, kind of a similar story. Just Penn State, very, very good team. They're just not in that elite tier where, Ohio State and Michigan is quite yet. They played them, both teams very close, but they're just not quite there yet. Oregon, 2 times against Washington.
Yep.
They just came down to 1-possession games.
Yep.
And the difference is Washington is now the Pac-12 champion and is going to be the number 2 seed in the playoff. And Oregon is basically in 2 games. They're just 1 possession difference, 1 score different. So no shame for them. And they're going to get they're getting a New Year's Six bowl. I know you're not so happy about their opponent,
No.
but it's a great opportunity. It sounds like Bo Nix is going to play in that game.
That's what I've been hearing.
Great opportunity for them to go and get a New Year's Six trophy, which is a very fitting end for their season. And New Year's Six bowls are still very important, and which I think will be a really good springboard for them. They're obviously, everyone's expecting them to win that game, which is would be a fantastic springboard for them into next season as they enter Big Ten play. So it'll be a lot of momentum and stuff. And in Ohio State, that is what it is. They're right there at the same talent level with Michigan and all of those playoff teams.
Right.
That game came down to a 1-possession game in the last game of the season in the Big Ten. So, they're right there, and their expectation as a team is they're going to be in the college football playoff every year, competing for national championships. They didn't quite make it this year, but still a great season. So, those 4 teams don't surprise me at all.
Well, and I wish, you mentioned the Oregon Bowl, which I can't stand that they're playing Liberty.
Yeah.
But you look at how some of the bowls outside of the playoffs are, and you get your 5-6 to play each other. So FSU and Georgia are playing each other. I'd love to have Ohio State and Oregon play each other in a bowl. That would be phenomenal. But of course, we get Oregon and Liberty.
And that probably, if their FSU lost to Louisville, or if Georgia would have taken care of business and beaten Alabama, you probably would have had that Oregon-Ohio State matchup, which would have been fantastic.
Would have loved it.
But, Georgia goes and loses, causes chaos.
Right.
And then Florida State not getting selected. We already had another episode where we talked about bowls, but Florida State not getting selected to go to the college football playoff changed everything and made everything loopy. So, again, I know as a fan, and I'm sure Oregon fans, they'd rather see a better opponent.
Sure.
But I still think great way for Oregon to close out the season. Hopefully for them getting a New Year's Six trophy. I think it'll be good for them.
Totally agree. I'll put a link up top here if you're interested in what we have to say about the college football playoff as well as the New Year's Six Bowls. We did a whole episode on that. I'll put that link up here. You can go check that out here. Let's get to our top 2, Steve.
Yeah.
So drum roll. Is it going to be Washington? Is it going to be Michigan? We've had Michigan and Washington in the past in power rankings, both of them sitting at number 1 before. Here we sit, the final one, we have Michigan, number 1, Washington, number 2. I have been high on Michigan pretty much the entire year. Anytime you think they may have a questionable game, they come back really strong. I really like J.J. McCarthy's play. And Washington, I think they're right there. They're a fantastic team to watch. I love their offense. Everybody talks about their passing game. When we talked reaction videos, I talked about how much I was impressed by Johnson and just fantastic running game, and they showed what they can do on defense against against Nix. And so I just 2 great teams. I'm so happy they're both in the college football playoff. I'm glad they're not playing each other in the college football in game 1. I'd love to see that be the national championship game if we get there. But hey, what are your thoughts on Michigan here?
So I really struggled with this because they're both. They could be 1A and 1B. I mean, it really is what it is. Like you said, they've swapped places different times. We've had them both. I really couldn't make a decision, so I just kind of left them kind of in the order. They both held serve. They did what they were supposed to do.
Right.
And you really could make a case with Washington because they had to beat Oregon twice. Mm-hmm. This would have been like basically if Michigan would have had to beat Ohio State and then play them again in the conference championship game. That's not what they had to do. They had to beat that Iowa team. So I really, when you look at Michigan, there's also an argument that you can make the argument that they are the most complete team in the entire college football landscape this year in the country. So I didn't know which way to go on this.
Yeah.
They held serve. They both did what they were supposed to, so I just kept them in there. The funny thing is going into the playoff, even though Michigan is the number 1 seed, I think they have the much harder. If I had 2 teams right now if I had to choose between playing Texas in the playoff and playing Alabama in the playoff, I'd rather play Texas. So I think Washington actually has a better path in the playoff. We'll see how it goes. That would make for one heck of a championship game if they were both to get through there.
Yeah.
So both of these teams, great seasons. Michigan season, let's just say we tried to keep everything on the field when we look at these teams.
Yes.
But their season has been, tainted in some ways by the Harbaugh suspensions and the off the field stuff and the scandals and all that kind of stuff. But the players and the assistant coaches battled through and they did exactly what they needed to do.
Yep.
So kudos to them. Kudos to those players. And for Washington, all the doubters all season, even after they beat Oregon the first time, everybody, including us, thought maybe Oregon had the chance to beat them the second time. And they just went, and as we talked about in the recap video, they left no doubt in the first quarter of that game who was the Pac-12 champion. So they handled business. So good on them. Great season for them. Really happy for them, and just both of these teams, great solid teams, and both are going to be in the college football playoff where they belong.
Yeah, hey, I'm going to throw the slide back up one more time. Look at Michigan here, and these are our power rankings, but they're pretty similar to anybody that would be doing this. So Michigan, our number 1 team, beat our number 3 team, beat our number 5 team, beat our number 6 team. I mean, they aren't beating bottom of the barrel teams. No. They are beating. They just that to me that's why they're the number 1 team.
Yeah.
The teams they have beat, and yes, Washington beat Oregon twice.
Right.
I get that, but where's everybody else? Well, we have USC and UCLA down in 14-15. Yes, Oregon State we have sitting at 7th. Yeah. We don't have everybody on here. We don't have Arizona, and there's other strong Pac-12 teams. But when you just look at the lineup and who Michigan has had to go through here, to me, their strength of schedule makes them the number 1 team in the country. That doesn't mean they can't lose to Alabama.
Right.
But it makes them the number 1 team in the country right now, for our power rankings, and clearly the CFP thought the same thing.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Between when you look at their roster, their overall talent, everything about them, they're just a complete team. They did exactly what they needed to do to take care of business. You mentioned the strength of the schedule. It is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
The teams they had to go through in the Big Ten really. And specifically in their own division, have to beat Penn State and Ohio State just to win their own division.
Yes.
To make it to that championship game, it was quite the gauntlet. That's why we have them number 1, and that's why the college football playoff has them number 1.
Right.
So just kudos to them.
Hey, with that, we will wrap it up. This is our last power ranking video we're going to do for the year, obviously. Just as a reminder, we're going to pick every bowl game this year. We're going to try to do our first live episode for the first weekend of bowl picks. We're going to try to do that on the 13th, the evening of the 13th. We'll get you out the details here shortly on that. Going to try to do our first live episode, Steve. Should be fun. And with that, hey, we thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.
Go Navy, beat Army.